The massive space station Harmony Point floated in the void between three solar systems, like a glittering jewel against the black canvas of space. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its many ports, bringing delegates from across the galaxy, for what many hoped would be the most important peace summit in centuries. The war between the Terran Federation and the Zephyrian Empire had raged for nearly a decade, and both sides were finally ready to talk instead of fight. Captain Jake Morrison stepped off the human transport ship wearing his full military dress, armor. The suit was thick and bulky, with visible joints and mechanical servos that whirred softly as he moved. Compared to the sleek energy shields and form-fitting protection worn by other species, the human armor looked primitive and outdated. Jake carried his helmet under his arm, showing a face weathered by years of combat, but his eyes held a calm intelligence that missed nothing. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez walked beside him wearing civilian clothes, but Jake noticed she stayed close, to his protective presence. Behind them came Dr. Amy Foster and the rest of the human delegation, all moving with the careful, measured steps of people who had spent years learning to control their movements around fragile alien allies. The main docking bay buzzed with activity as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the opening ceremony. The tall, elegant Altarians floated above the crowd on their anti-gravity platforms, while the crystalline Vorthon representatives communicated through harmonic vibrations that made the air itself sing. Near the center of the bay, the Zephyrian royal delegation had claimed a large space around their gleaming white and gold transport vessel. Princess Lyra Veltar emerged from the Zephyrian ship like a vision from some alien fairy tale. At 18, she was considered barely an adult by her species standards, but she carried herself with the supreme confidence of someone born to rule an empire. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow from within, and her silver hair flowed like liquid metal down her back. She wore a form-fitting suit of what appeared to be living armor that shifted and moved with her body, adapting to every gesture. The princess surveyed the gathered delegates with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and no small amount of arrogance. Her gaze swept across the various alien species, taking note of their technology, their bearing, their obvious strengths and weaknesses. When her eyes fell on the human delegation, she paused, and Jake could see her lips curve into what might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. The opening ceremony began in the station's Grand Assembly Hall, a vast chamber with walls of transparent aluminum that offered stunning views of the surrounding star fields. Representatives from the Galactic Council took their positions at the central podium, while delegates arranged themselves in careful diplomatic order around the circular chamber. Jake stood with his delegation in their assigned section, noting how other species gave them a wide berth. This was normal. Humans had a reputation for being dangerous even when they were trying to be peaceful. The mechanical whir of his armor's servos seemed loud in the formal atmosphere, but he had long since stopped being self-conscious about the noise. Council Chairman Vextar began the ceremony with the traditional words of welcome in the common galactic tongue. His voice carried the weight of authority accumulated over 2 centuries of diplomatic service. One by one, he introduced each delegation, starting with the oldest and most established civilizations and working his way down to the newer members of the galactic community. When he reached the human delegation, Jake stepped forward and removed his helmet in the traditional gesture of peaceful intent. The cameras focused on his face, broadcasting the image across the galaxy to billions of viewers who were watching these historic proceedings. Princess Lyra chose that moment to make her opinion known. Her voice carried clearly across the silent chamber, thanks to the excellent acoustics designed to let every delegate be heard. "Look at that primitive armor," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "It looks like something a child might build from scrap metal found in a junkyard." An uncomfortable silence fell over the assembly. Diplomatic protocol strictly forbade such open insults during formal ceremonies, but Princess Lyra was young and apparently felt that royal privilege allowed her to speak her mind. Her own guards stood behind her in their gleaming energy shields that flickered and pulsed with contained power, making the human armor look even more primitive by comparison. Jake remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged by the insult. He had faced far worse than words in his years of military service, and the opinion of an arrogant alien princess meant little to him. But he could see the embarrassment on Ambassador Rodriguez's face and knew this breach of protocol would make the negotiations more difficult. Perhaps, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume, armor should be judged by its effectiveness rather than its appearance. Princess Lyra laughed a sound like silver bells that might have been pleasant if it had not been filled with such contempt. Effectiveness? She repeated. That collection of metal plates and mechanical joints looks like it belongs in a museum of primitive warfare. My people developed energy shielding centuries ago while you humans are still strapping metal plates to your bodies like ancient barbarians. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably at the escalating tension. The Altarian representative made a soft whistling sound that indicated distress, while the Vorthon crystals dimmed with what Jake had learned was their equivalent of embarrassment. Even some of the Zephyrian nobles looked uncomfortable with their princess's behavior. The human delegation, Chairman Vextar said firmly, is here by invitation of the Galactic Council and deserves the same respect accorded to all our guests. Princess, Lyra waved a dismissive hand. Of course they deserve respect for their courage in coming here despite their obvious technological disadvantages. I simply find it fascinating that a species would cling to such outdated equipment when superior. Alternatives exist. It suggests a certain resistance to progress that might explain why they have struggled so much in this war. Dr. Foster stepped forward, her medical training making her sensitive to the rising tension in the room. Perhaps we could save discussions of technology for the formal negotiation sessions, she suggested diplomatically. Oh, I am not discussing technology, Princess Lyra replied with another of those cold laughs. I am merely observing that some species advance while others remain trapped in the past. The evidence is right there for all to see. She gestured toward Jake's armor with an elegant sweep of her arm. Jake could feel the eyes of every delegate in the chamber watching him, waiting to see how the human would respond to such blatant provocation. The smart diplomatic move would be to ignore the insults and focus on the peace process. But something in the princess's tone suggested she was not simply being rude, but was actively trying to undermine human credibility before the negotiations even began. Armor serves many purposes, Jake said calmly. Protection is only one of them. Princess Lyra raised one elegant eyebrow. And what other purposes could such primitive equipment possibly serve? Jake met her gaze steadily, his expression giving nothing away. Sometimes the most important purpose of armor is to protect others from the person wearing it. The princess laughed again, but this time the sound held a note of uncertainty. Something in Jake's tone suggested depths she had not expected from what she assumed was a simple military officer from a backward world. The ceremony continued, but the tension remained thick in the air. Jake could see that Princess Lyra's insults had accomplished their purpose. Other delegates were looking at the human delegation with fresh doubt, wondering if a species that could not even develop proper armor could be trusted as equal partners in galactic affairs. As the formal presentations concluded and delegates began to move toward the reception halls, Jake noticed that Princess Lyra continued to watch him with calculating eyes. She had drawn first blood in what was shaping up to be a difficult diplomatic battle, but Jake had survived worse odds before, and he had no intention of letting an arrogant teenager derail the peace process his people desperately needed. The reception hall buzzed with quiet conversations as delegates from across the galaxy mingled during the break between formal sessions. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns through the transparent walls, while servers moved between groups, offering refreshments suitable for dozens of different species. Jake stood with Ambassador Rodriguez and Dr. Foster near one of the large viewing windows, watching the slow dance of starships around the station. Princess Lyra held court near the center of the hall, surrounded by admirers from various delegations who seemed drawn to her youth and confidence. Her voice carried across the room as she continued her commentary on primitive human technology, much to the amusement of her audience. Jake ignored the sound, focusing instead on the diplomatic conversations he needed to have before negotiations resumed. The attack came without warning. Emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the station as the lights flickered and dimmed to emergency power. Through the viewing windows, Jake could see sleek black ships emerging from what had appeared to be empty space, their hulls rippling with stealth technology that had fooled the station's sensors until they were almost close enough to dock. Void. Syndicate, Ambassador Rodriguez whispered, her face going pale. The terrorist organization was known throughout the galaxy, for their advanced weapons and their complete disregard for diplomatic immunity. They targeted peace negotiations and trade summits, anywhere they could find large gatherings of government officials. Explosions echoed through the station's hull as the attackers used some kind of advanced cutting tool to breach the outer sections. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone grab for support as the station shuddered under the assault. Jake could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons firing somewhere deeper in the complex. All delegates to secure areas, the station's automated voice announced in a dozen languages. This is not a drill. Hostile forces have breached the outer hull. Security teams respond to sections 7 through 12. The reception hall erupted into chaos as delegates from dozens of species tried to reach the designated safe zones. The elegant Altarians struggled to maintain their anti-gravity platforms in the fluctuating power, while the crystalline Vorthans huddled together their harmonic communications, creating a discordant wail of fear. Near the center of the room, Princess Lyra's royal guards formed a protective circle around her, their energy shields crackling to full power. Jake moved quickly to the human delegation, gathering them together with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with combat situations before. "Stay close and stay calm," he told them quietly. "We need to reach the emergency shelters." But as they moved toward the exits, it became clear that the attackers had planned their assault carefully. Explosions blocked several of the main corridors, and the emergency systems reported breaches in multiple sections. The safe zones that had seemed so secure were now cut off from most of the station. "This way," Jake said, leading his people toward a service corridor that might still be passable. Princess Lyra and her guards were moving in the same direction, their formation keeping other delegates at a distance. Jake could see the fear in the young princess's eyes, despite her efforts to maintain royal composure. They had barely entered the corridor when the first Syndicate soldiers appeared at the far end. The attackers wore black armor that seemed to absorb light and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Jake recognized the design. They were using military-grade equipment that could punch through most defensive systems. "Energy shields up," the Zephyrian guard captain ordered. The royal guards activated their protective barriers, creating a shimmering wall of force between the princess and the approaching threat. Other delegates huddled behind the protection, grateful for any defense against the attackers. The Syndicate soldiers opened fire without warning. Their weapons discharged bolts of searing energy that struck the Zephyrian shields with thunderous impacts. For a moment, the barriers held, absorbing the devastating attacks while the guards returned fire with their own weapons. But the Syndicate had come prepared for this level of resistance. Jake watched in growing alarm as the energy shields began to flicker and fade under the sustained assault. The advanced Zephyrian technology that Princess Lyra had bragged about was failing against weapons specifically designed to counter it. "Shields at 60%, one of the guards reported, his voice tight with strain. "We cannot maintain this for much longer." Princess Lyra stood frozen behind her failing protection, staring at the approaching soldiers with eyes wide with terror. The confident young woman who had mocked human technology just hours before now looked like exactly what she was, a frightened teenager facing her first real battle. The shields collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The Syndicate soldiers advanced methodically, their weapons trained on the now defenseless group. Jake could see more attackers moving into position behind them, cutting off any hope of retreat. The corridor had become a trap, and they were caught in the middle with nowhere to run. "Surrender, and you will not be harmed," the lead Syndicate soldier announced through his helmet speakers. "We are here for the delegates, not the civilians. Comply, and this will be over quickly." Ambassador Rodriguez stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over, despite the desperate situation. "Under galactic law, diplomatic personnel are protected during—" "Galactic law does not apply here," the soldier interrupted. "You have 30 seconds to surrender before we begin eliminating resistors." Jake looked around the corridor, taking in the tactical situation with the calm assessment that had kept him alive through years of warfare. 15 Syndicate soldiers with military-grade weapons and armor facing a mixed group of terrified diplomats, and exhausted Zephyrian guards whose equipment had already proven inadequate. The math was simple, and the outcome was clear, unless he changed the equation. Jake began removing his helmet, setting it carefully on the floor. Princess Lyra stared at him in confusion and growing fear. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Are you surrendering? Are you abandoning us?" Jake did not answer immediately. Instead, he began working on the seals of his chest plate, his movements deliberate and methodical. The mechanical servos in his armor whined softly as he disengaged the locking mechanisms that held the heavy plates in place. 20 seconds, the Syndicate soldier announced. Dr. Foster understood what Jake was doing before the others. Her medical knowledge of human physiology told her exactly why Jake was removing his protective gear. She moved to stand between the aliens and Jake, giving him more time to work while shielding them from what was about to happen. "Captain Morrison," Ambassador Rodriguez said quietly, "what are your intentions?" Jake looked up from his armor for a moment, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. "My intentions are to get everyone out of here alive," he said simply. Then he returned his attention to the complex process of removing the restraints that had limited his movements since he put the armor on years before. Princess Lyra watched in growing panic as the human seemed to be preparing to abandon his protection entirely. "You cannot fight them without armor," she hissed. "Their weapons will kill you instantly. At least with the armor you might survive long enough for rescue to arrive." Jake finished removing his chest plate and set it beside his helmet. Already his breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled as his body adapted to operating without the weight and restrictions he had carried for so long. He began working on the arm pieces next his fingers, moving with practiced precision, despite the time pressure. 10 seconds, the Syndicate soldier called out. "Please," Princess Lyra whispered, her voice breaking with fear. "Do not leave us defenseless. I know I mocked your armor, but surely it is better than nothing. Surely you are not just going to strip it off and let them kill us all?" Jake paused in his work long enough to look at the terrified princess. For the first time since meeting her, he saw past the arrogance and royal privilege to the frightened young woman underneath. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "you misunderstood the purpose of this armor." "Time's up," the Syndicate leader announced, raising his weapon toward the group. Jake stood up, having removed the last of his arm restraints. "The armor was never meant to protect me," he said, and stepped forward into the line of fire. The Syndicate soldier's weapon discharged with a brilliant flash that should have reduced Jake to ash and vapor. Instead, the energy bolt struck his chest and scattered harmlessly across his skin like water hitting heated metal. Jake kept walking, forward, his pace steady and unhurried, as if he were taking a casual stroll through a garden instead of advancing into deadly weapons fire. Princess Lyra's mouth fell open in shock. The energy discharge that had effortlessly penetrated her guards. Advanced shields had not even slowed the human down. Jake's skin showed no sign of burn or injury where the bolt had struck, and his expression remained completely calm. "Impossible," the Syndicate soldier muttered, raising his weapon for another shot. "No species can survive a direct hit from a plasma disruptor." Jake continued his advance without bothering to respond. The soldier fired again and then again, each shot striking the human center mass with enough force to vaporize most known materials. But Jake absorbed each impact without flinching, his steady approach, never faltering. Dr. Foster stepped forward to address the terrified aliens huddled behind Jake's advancing form. "What you are witnessing," she said in her professional medical voice, "is a human operating without the safety restrictions we normally maintain around other species." "Safety restrictions?" Princess Lyra repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "The armor Captain Morrison was wearing serves multiple functions," Dr. Foster explained while Jake closed the distance to the Syndicate soldiers. "Yes, it provides protection, but more importantly, it limits human physical capabilities to levels that are safe for interaction with allied species." Jake reached the first Syndicate soldier before the man could switch to a different weapon. Human's hand closed around the soldier's throat with what looked like a gentle grip, but the result was immediate and final. The advanced armor that had protected the attacker from conventional weapons crumpled like paper under Jake's fingers. Princess Lyra watched in horrified fascination as Jake moved through the Syndicate formation with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. His movements were too fast for her eyes to follow properly, and his strength appeared to have no upper limit. Soldiers who had seemed invincible moments before were falling like wheat before a harvester. How is this possible? She gasped. Dr. Foster continued her clinical explanation, even as the battle raged in front of them. Humans evolved on Earth, a planet with twice the standard galactic gravity in an atmosphere that would be toxic to most species. Our bones are dense enough to support our body weight in crushing gravitational fields. Our muscles are designed to function under conditions that would paralyze other species. Jake picked up a fallen piece of corridor plating that must have weighed several hundred pounds and threw it with casual ease. The improvised projectile struck 3 Syndicate soldiers simultaneously, sending them flying backward into the far wall, where they did not get up again. But surely, Princess Lyra said, her voice shaking, surely your weapons and technology are primitive compared to galactic standards. You cannot match our energy shields or our faster-than-light drives. Our technology appears primitive, Dr. Foster agreed, because we design it to be operated by humans wearing restrictive armor. When Captain Morrison puts that armor back on, he will move slowly and carefully to avoid accidentally injuring anyone around him. The servos and mechanical joints you mocked are not enhancements, they are limiters. Jake had reached the far end of the corridor where more Syndicate soldiers were trying to set up a defensive position. He moved through their barricade like it was made of tissue paper, his hands tearing through advanced materials that should have been impervious to physical force. The attackers' energy weapons continued to fire, but the bolts seemed to have no more effect on Jake than raindrops. This is impossible, one of the soldiers screamed into his communicator. We need heavy weapons. The standard equipment is useless against whatever this thing is. Thing? Princess Lyra repeated the word with dawning understanding. To most galactic species, Dr. Foster said sadly, humans at full capability appear monstrous. We learned early in our contact with the galactic community that our natural strength and endurance frightened other species. The armor was developed not just for diplomatic reasons, but as a kindness to our allies. Jake finished with the immediate threat and began working his way back toward the group. Princess Lyra could see that he was not even breathing heavily despite having just fought through 24 heavily armed soldiers. His skin showed no sign of injury, and his movements remained fluid and controlled. Every human in the military learns to operate in armor from basic training, Dr. Foster continued. We practice moving slowly and gently until it becomes second nature. We limit our strength, our speed, our reflexes, everything that makes us effective in combat because the alternative is to terrify our allies. But why? Princess Lyra asked. If humans possess such incredible capabilities, why would you limit yourselves? Why not use your advantages? Jake rejoined the group and began the process of putting his armor back on. Because strength without restraint is not strength, he said as he lifted the heavy chest plate and began engaging the locking mechanisms. It is just destruction. Princess Lyra watched in fascination as the mechanical servos engaged, and Jake's movements immediately became slower and more careful. The armor was not enhancing his abilities, she realized it was containing them. Every joint and servo was designed to prevent the human inside from moving at his natural speed or with his full strength. Your people developed energy shields, Jake continued as he secured his arm plates, because you needed protection from external threats. Humans developed containment armor because we needed to protect others from ourselves. The implications hit Princess Lyra like a physical blow. Every human she had ever encountered had been operating under severe limitations designed to make them appear less threatening to other species. The clumsy mechanical armor she had mocked was actually sophisticated technology designed to handicap its wearer. How many humans serve in your military? She asked quietly. Active duty personnel number approximately 50 million, Ambassador Rodriguez answered, but all human civilians receive basic training in containment protocols as well. Princess, Lyra's mind reeled at the numbers. 50 million humans trained for combat, and each one capable of the devastating performance she had just witnessed. No wonder the Zephyrian Empire had struggled in their war against humanity. They had been fighting an enemy whose true capabilities were hidden behind layers of diplomatic courtesy. The war, she whispered. Your people have been fighting us, while wearing restrictive armor. Jake finished sealing his helmet, and his voice took on the mechanical tone imposed by the suit's communication system. Military regulations require full containment gear during all operations involving potential alien casualties, he confirmed. We cannot risk accidentally harming non-combatant populations. The sound of running feet echoed from multiple directions. as station security teams finally began to respond to the emergency. Jake's display of human capabilities had lasted less than 10 minutes, but in that time he had eliminated an entire syndicate strike force that had overwhelmed the station's defenses. Princess Lyra looked at the scattered remains of the attackers, and then at Jake, who was once again moving with the careful measured steps she had mistaken for clumsiness. The whir of his armor's servos no longer sounded primitive to her ears. Instead, it sounded like the controlled breathing of a sleeping dragon. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, "I owe you an apology." Jake's helmet turned toward her, and she could see her own reflection in his visor. "No apology is necessary, Your Highness. You could not have known what you were observing." "But I should have known," she replied. "I should have realized that a species capable of interstellar travel would not cling to primitive technology without good reason." Dr. Foster smiled sadly. "Most species make the same mistake, Princess. Humans have learned to accept being underestimated because the alternative is being feared." As security teams began to arrive, Jake stood protectively near the alien delegates, his armored form once again appearing bulky and primitive. But Princess Lyra would never again see human technology as a sign of backwardness. Instead, she now understood it as evidence of a philosophy that prized restraint over dominance. The young princess, who had mocked human armor hours before, now found herself looking at Captain Morrison with entirely different eyes, wondering what other misconceptions about humanity the galaxy had accepted as truth. The emergency continued to unfold across Harmony Point as more syndicate forces poured into the station through multiple breach points. Station security was overwhelmed, and desperate calls for assistance echoed through the communication systems. Jake listened to the tactical reports flowing through his armor's receivers while escorting the diplomatic group toward what remained of the safe zones. "Multiple hostiles in sections 4 through 9, a security officer reported over the emergency channel. "We have lost contact with teams in the central hub, requesting immediate backup from all available personnel." Jake stopped walking and tilted his armored head as if listening to something the others could not hear. Through his helmet's advanced sensors, he could detect weapon discharges from at least 6 different directions, along with the distinctive energy signatures of syndicate equipment. The attackers had not come just to eliminate a few delegates, they had come to take the entire station. "Captain?" Ambassador Rodriguez asked, noting his sudden stillness. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," Jake replied. "Station security cannot handle this level of assault. The syndicate brought enough firepower to capture Harmony Point completely." Princess Lyra felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the fluctuating life support systems. If the terrorists succeeded in taking the station, they would have hundreds of high-value hostages from across the galaxy. The political ramifications would destabilize entire sectors. "What are our options?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, as he processed tactical data streaming through his armor's communication array. "Limited," he admitted. "The safe zones have been compromised and rescue forces are still hours away. We need to reach the central command center where we can coordinate with what remains of station security." "But the command center is on the other side of the station," Dr. Foster pointed out. "We would have to fight our way through dozens of hostile positions." "We would," Jake agreed. Then he began removing his armor again. Princess Lyra watched with growing understanding as Jake methodically disengaged the locking mechanisms that had contained his capabilities. She no longer saw the action as surrender or abandonment. Instead, she recognized it as a warrior preparing for battle. The mechanical servos whined in protest as Jake removed each piece of restrictive equipment. "Captain Morrison," Ambassador Rodriguez said quietly, "military regulations clearly state—" "Military regulations," Jake interrupted as he set aside his chest plate, "also state that the safety of Allied personnel takes priority over containment protocols during extreme combat situations." He looked up at the ambassador with steady eyes. "I would say this qualifies as extreme." From deeper in the station came the sound of running footsteps and urgent voices speaking in human languages. Jake smiled grimly as he recognized the voices of his fellow officers who had apparently reached the same tactical conclusion he had. Lieutenant Dan Carter rounded the corner at a run, his own armor half removed and his face grim with determination. Behind him came Sergeant Lisa Murphy, who had already stripped down to the basic protective undersuit that all human military personnel wore beneath their containment gear. "Sir," Carter reported breathlessly, "the syndicate has control of the primary Power systems and most of the docking bays. They're herding civilians into holding areas while they search for specific high-value targets. Status of other human personnel? Jake asked as he continued removing his armor. Major Brown and his team are pinned down in Section 12, Murphy replied. Commander Hayes is attempting to reach the armory, but her route is blocked by at least 30 hostiles. We're it for immediate response. Princess Lyra looked between the three humans who were systematically preparing to abandon the safety measures she now understood were designed to protect everyone around them. How many Syndicate soldiers are we facing? She asked. Intelligence estimates between 200 and 300, Carter answered as he removed his helmet. They've been planning this assault for months, maybe years. Every piece of their equipment is specifically designed to counter known galactic defense systems, but not human physiology, Jake said grimly. Murphy finished removing her arm restraints and flexed her hands experimentally. Even with the basic undersuit still limiting her movements, Princess Lyra could see the difference in the woman's bearing. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had suddenly been released from a cage. Rules of engagement, sir? Carter asked. Protect the civilians, eliminate the threats, and try not to damage the station's critical systems, Jake replied. Standard extreme situation protocols apply. Princess Lyra did not understand the military terminology, but she could see the change that came over the three humans as they prepared for combat. Their breathing synchronized, their movements became more economical, and their eyes took on a focused intensity that made her instinctively step backward. Your Highness, Jake said, turning to address her directly, I need you and the other delegates to remain here while we clear a path to the command center. Dr. Foster will stay with you and provide medical assistance if needed. You cannot possibly fight through hundreds of armed soldiers with just 3 people, Princess Lyra protested. Jake's smile was not entirely reassuring. Your Highness, the Syndicate made one critical error in their planning. They prepared to fight galactic species using galactic tactics against galactic equipment. They did not prepare to fight humans. The 3 officers moved out with Carter taking point while Murphy covered their rear. Jake fell into the middle position, coordinating their advance through hand signals that were too fast for Princess Lyra to follow. Within moments, they had disappeared into the station's maze of corridors, leaving only the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. Dr. Foster activated a portable medical scanner and began checking the non-human delegates for injuries. We should find a secure position and wait, she advised. This could take some time. But the sounds of battle reached them within minutes. Through the station's hull, Princess Lyra could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons firing in, sustained bursts followed by sounds she could not identify, metal screaming under impossible stress and impacts that shook the entire structure. What is happening out there? One of the Altarian delegates asked his anti-gravity platform, wavering with fear. Dr. Foster continued her medical work without looking up. Captain Morrison and his team are eliminating hostile forces, she replied, matter-of-factly. The battle sounds moved through the station like a storm front, with the intensity of weapon fire rising and falling as the humans encountered different groups of Syndicate soldiers. Princess Lyra tried to track their progress, but the acoustic chaos made it impossible to determine locations or numbers. After 30 minutes, the emergency communication channels began carrying panicked reports from the Syndicate forces. Team 7 has gone silent, one voice reported. Last transmission indicated they were under attack by unknown hostiles. Team 12 is not responding, another voice added. We found their equipment scattered in Corridor Junction 9 Alpha, but no bodies. What happened to Team 12? A third voice demanded. Unknown, sir. The security footage shows 3 figures moving too fast for the cameras to track clearly. Whatever hit them was not using energy weapons. Princess Lyra exchanged glances with Dr. Foster, who smiled sadly. Humans prefer not to rely on technology when their natural capabilities are sufficient, the doctor explained. More reports flooded the communication channels as the Syndicate commanders tried to understand what was happening to their carefully planned operation. Entire squads of soldiers were disappearing without explanation, while others reported being attacked by enemies who seemed immune to their weapons. Central command to all units, a harsh voice cut through the confusion. We have new intelligence on station personnel. There are humans aboard. Repeat, there are humans aboard. All teams switch to heavy weapons and maintain maximum distance from targets. But the warning came too late. Jake and his team had already torn through half the Syndicate. forces and were working their way systematically toward the remaining strongholds. The attackers who had seemed invincible against station security found themselves facing opponents who operated by completely different rules. "Command to all units, evacuate, repeat, evacuate immediately," the syndicate leader finally ordered. "Mission. Parameters have changed, abort the operation and return to the ships." Princess Lyra listened to the panic in the terrorist commander's voice and realized she was hearing something unprecedented in galactic history. The feared Void Syndicate, one of the most successful terrorist organizations in known space, was retreating, in complete disorder from 3 humans who had simply taken off their armor. The sounds of battle faded as the remaining Syndicate forces fled toward their ships. Within an hour, Jake and his team returned to collect the diplomatic group, their armor once again properly sealed and their movements carefully controlled. "Situation report?" Ambassador Rodriguez asked. "All hostile forces have been eliminated, or have fled the station," Jake replied through his helmet's communication system. "Station security is regaining control of critical systems and medical teams are responding to casualties." Princess Lyra stared at the 3 armored figures who had just accomplished what hundreds of station security personnel could not. The emergency lights gradually returned to normal as Harmony Point's systems came back online and the immediate crisis passed. Medical teams worked to treat the injured while maintenance crews began repairs to the damaged sections. Throughout, the station word spread quickly about what had happened and how 3 humans had single-handedly repelled an entire syndicate assault force. Princess Lyra sat in the restored diplomatic lounge, staring out at the stars while trying to process everything she had witnessed. Her royal guards stood nearby, their energy shield generators repaired, but somehow the advanced technology no longer seemed as impressive as it had that morning. Dr. Foster approached with a medical scanner, checking to ensure the princess had not been injured during the crisis. "Physically, you appear to be unharmed," the doctor reported. "But psychological trauma from combat situations is common even among trained personnel. Would you like me to provide a mild sedative to help you rest?" Princess Lyra shook her head slowly. "No, thank you, doctor. I need to think clearly right now." She paused, looking toward where Jake stood with the other human delegates. "I need to understand what I have learned today." Jake approached them, walking with the careful, measured steps that his armor imposed. Princess Lyra noticed details she had missed before: the way he positioned himself to avoid accidentally bumping into furniture, the deliberate spacing he maintained from other people, the constant awareness in his movements of his own size and strength. "Your Highness," Jake said formally, "I wanted to check on your condition and apologize for any distress our actions may have caused." Princess Lyra looked up at his armored form, seeing it with completely different eyes than she had just hours before. "Captain Morrison, you have nothing to apologize for. If anything, I am the one who owes you an explanation for my behavior during the opening ceremony." "That is not necessary," Jake began, but Princess Lyra held up her hand. "Please let me speak," she said, rising to her feet. "I mocked your armor and called it primitive scrap metal. I suggested that humans were too backward to deserve a place in galactic civilization. I said these things in front of representatives from dozens of worlds, and I said them with the arrogance of someone who thought she understood what she was seeing." Jake remained silent, allowing her to continue. "But I understood nothing," Princess Lyra admitted. "I saw mechanical joints and assumed crudeness. I saw bulky plates and assumed inefficiency. I saw servos and limiters and assumed technological inferiority. What I was actually seeing was the most sophisticated restraint system ever developed, and I was too ignorant to recognize it." Dr. Foster smiled encouragingly. "Understanding often comes from experience, Princess. Today you experienced something few beings in the galaxy have witnessed." "I have a question," Princess Lyra said, looking directly at Jake. "During our war, your people could have removed their armor at any time. You could have ended the conflict in days rather than years. Why did you choose to fight with restrictions that made victory so much more difficult?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Because easy victory and lasting peace are not the same thing, Your Highness. If humans had unleashed our full capabilities against your people, the war would have ended quickly, but the fear and resentment would have lasted for generations. You fought a limited war to preserve the possibility of future friendship," Princess Lyra said with dawning understanding. "We fought a war to defend ourselves," Jake corrected gently, "but we fought it in a way that would not make future cooperation impossible. Humans learned long ago that strength used without wisdom creates more problems than it solves. Ambassador Rodriguez joined the conversation, having finished her own discussions with station officials. "The preliminary damage reports are encouraging," she said. "Station systems are coming back online and civilian casualties were minimal, thanks to the quick response of security teams. And thanks to Captain Morrison and his officers?" Princess Lyra added firmly. "Without their intervention, the Syndicate would have captured the entire station and hundreds of hostages." "The captain and his team performed admirably," Rodriguez agreed. "Though I suspect there will be lengthy discussions in the military command about the decision to remove containment gear in a diplomatic setting." Jake's helmet turned slightly toward the ambassador. "The regulations are clear, ma'am. Extreme combat situations permit temporary suspension of containment protocols when civilian lives are at stake." "I am not questioning your judgment, Captain," Rodriguez said quickly. "I am simply noting that today's events will likely prompt a review of those regulations." Princess Lyra felt a sudden stab of concern. "You will not be punished for saving our lives, will you?" "Military discipline is an internal matter, Your Highness," Jake replied diplomatically. But Dr. Foster shook her head. "Actually, Princess, your testimony as a witness could be quite important. The decision to remove containment gear is always controversial within human command structures. Your account of events might help ensure that Captain Morrison's actions are properly recognized." Princess Lyra straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of royal responsibility settling on her. "Then you shall have my complete support, Captain. I will testify before any tribunal that your actions were not only justified but essential." She paused, looking around the diplomatic lounge where delegates from dozens of species were slowly returning to their duties. Many of them kept glancing toward the human delegation, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright awe. "There is something else I must do," Princess Lyra said. "I need to address the full assembly and correct the statements I made this morning. The galaxy needs to understand what humans truly represent." Jake shook his armored head. "That is not necessary, Your Highness. We are accustomed to being misunderstood." "But it is wrong," Princess Lyra said with growing passion. "And it is dangerous. If the galaxy continues to view humans as primitive or weak, then we will continue to make the same mistakes I made today. We will underestimate your people and fail to appreciate the incredible restraint you show in your daily interactions with us." Dr. Foster looked thoughtful. "She has a point, Captain. Misunderstandings about human capabilities have led to diplomatic problems before." "More than that," Princess Lyra continued, "the galaxy needs to understand that humans represent something we have rarely seen: true strength combined with genuine wisdom. Your people could dominate galactic civilization, but instead, you choose to participate as equals, despite the personal cost that choice requires." Jake was quiet for several minutes, considering her words. Around them, the diplomatic reception was slowly resuming as delegates tried to return to normal activities despite the day's extraordinary events. "What would you propose, Your Highness?" he finally asked. Princess Lyra smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "I propose that the Zephyrian Empire formally requests that the Terran Federation provide military advisors to help train our forces, not in combat techniques but in the philosophy of restraint." The suggestion clearly surprised Jake. Military philosophy is not typically a subject for diplomatic exchange. "Perhaps it should be," Princess Lyra replied. "Today I learned that the most advanced military technology in the galaxy is not weapons or shields, but the wisdom to know when not to use one's full power. My people could benefit from such wisdom." She looked around the lounge again, noting how other delegates continued to watch the human group with new interest and respect. "The war between our peoples began because we misunderstood each other," she continued. "We saw human restraint as weakness and human caution as fear. We interpreted your diplomatic approach as evidence that you could not match our military might. Today I learned that the opposite was true. Humans were being diplomatic because you could afford to be." Ambassador Rodriguez smiled. "That is a very mature assessment, Princess. I think such cultural exchange programs could benefit both our peoples." "More than just our peoples," Princess Lyra said. "The entire galaxy could learn from human philosophy. We spend so much effort developing bigger weapons and stronger shields that we forget to ask whether we should use them. Jake removed his helmet for the first time since putting his armor back on, revealing a face that showed both exhaustion and satisfaction. Your Highness, if you are serious about this proposal, then the Terran Federation would be honored to discuss it further. Princess, Lyra extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting she had learned during diplomatic protocol training. I am completely serious, Captain. Today you showed me that true strength comes not from what you can do, but from choosing what you should do. Jake accepted her handshake, being careful to control his grip through the armor's limiters. Then perhaps, Your Highness, this crisis will lead to something better than what we had before. As the day concluded and preparations began for resuming the peace negotiations, Princess Lyra found herself looking forward to the discussions with an enthusiasm she had not felt that morning. She had come to Harmony Point, expecting to participate in routine diplomatic proceedings, but instead she had discovered something far more valuable, an understanding of what galactic civilization could become if it learned to combine strength with wisdom. The young princess who had mocked human technology that morning was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most advanced,